Well, thanks to Tom, who did send comments. Does everybody else have, were you able to look over the draft and have any more comments? I mean, we could just walk through the few points that Tom had suggested we look at.
Why don't we do that first?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I will share my screen. Let me get that up.
I did just get a note from Doug. He is planning on joining us momentarily.
Okay, great. Well, I'll hold up a little bit, but draft revised regulations, and these are the current ones. So just review. So thanks, Tom, for those comments, and I'll just note them as the agenda. One was whether we want to put some of the development standards up front to give developers more guidance. The other is the wording of the applicability. Is it still too confusing? Or I thought I'd add a diagram, maybe that helps. And the exceptions. So this section under exceptions, I appreciate Tom's input on that because these are in the current regulations, and some of them seemed still confusing or hard to interpret. So I wanted to go over those with you. Is this a good size? Right.
That works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it.
So these are today's. Oh, here's Doug. I see him. I got him.
So what did Tom
Okay.
comment
Well,
on?
now that Doug's here, we'll start in earnest. So the first comment was page 1. Consider including from item G conservation standards on page 7. Go there. To go right up front. So that kind of makes sense to put the minimum open space requirement right up front. And the buffers.
Okay.
So Tom, did you want to elaborate?
No, I just thought it's better placed early on. And again, I'm so worried that we will make this workable. There's no way of making it simple. We just got to make it more workable than the present system that we have. And, Chuck's been through this. And I guess he should be the last say on this. But again, my comments were very minor, just trying to simplify and clarify.
Right, and the two things basically were, to make it clear where this is applicable and what is the threshold for requiring a conservation subdivision. So the one, thought I had to make that first sentence more clear. A subdivision must be designed as a conservation subdivision if 10% of the parent parcel, excluding any constrained or unbuildable land, comprises conservation assets as defined below. So this is the formula, right? And the total parcel size, excluding the conservation, the constrained land, and that's the denominator. You divide the class 2 or 3 minus constrained land, and that equals 10%. So I understand what you're saying, Tom. And if you follow this, you can do it. Is it still too complicated?
Again, we're dealing with the developers and we're trying to lead them by the nose here.
Right.
Well, I understand that, and if I understand it, a developer should understand it, really.
You're smarter than the average bear, I think.
But I agree that it should be in the beginning.
Right, so we have this diagram for the applicability. And then if we put and then the well, we should finish this with the exception. So this is a requirement. We take out the constrained land from the total, divide that. So we take the constrained land from the total, and that's your denominator. If this purple line over A minus C is greater than 10%, you're going to require a conservation subdivision. The exceptions are the planning board can look at the site and say, well, it really doesn't make sense. If there's only 3 acres of land to be developed, you're not going to require it. If there's no, reasonable opportunity for preservation of, something meaningful, you're not going to require it. And the item that Tom suggested be deleted is looking at adjacent land. So I think your experience is this was hard to enforce. So it goes on to 2 pages, but this C demonstrate that the parcel doesn't adjoin other land that when combined with the open space on the parcel could preserve more. I agree with that, Tom. It is one of the considerations to link the two, but it's not a consideration for applicability.
It's hard enough to just focus on what's on the parcel that's being developed.
Yeah, and those considerations that are in this, and I understand where they're coming from, are still in the considerations when you're looking at which parts of the land to conserve. You want to consider what's nearby so that you can link the two if there's a potential to do that. But it shouldn't factor into the applicability because that does complicate it. I do agree with that. So I guess we've got a couple things here. Can we all agree that this be deleted?
I do.
I do
Yeah.
too.
Yes. I would agree.
Yes.
Okay, we will do that, delete.
I think the board is being given quite a bit of flexibility there, really.
Yeah. Okay, and then if we put the conservation standards up front, let me zoom to that again. How about the development standards too then? I mean, they're pretty short also.
Standard requirements.
We did add the, from the last meeting, we
Lot
wanted to
size.
put in the minimum lot size, so that's new as well.
So if I could just ask a general question. So it seems like to me in practice that what happens is we have our zoning districts, like for instance, SCR1, that says you can build a single family home on a 1 acre lot minimum. And it has to be one house, right? But conservation subdivision up until this point, I feel like has been used as essentially the get out of jail free card for the developers, that then they can design anything at all they want. And basically they don't have to go by the zoning because it's wide open. So my question is this development standards, this type 1, and I guess even going back, I was still kind of wrestling with the wording there and just reading a few through things, but the development standards here that you're talking about, specifically number 1, do you want to allow them that flexibility? Instead of saying, hey, you have to build a single family home in the SCR1, we're going to say you can build single family dwellings, 2-family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, or townhomes. I just want to make sure that that's what you guys want.
I agree with it for what it's worth. I think we've got to think outside the box, these single family dwellings with too much land around them.
Yeah, I like the flexibility too. I think there's a lot of different housing types, either existing or coming onto the market. And I think this gives the flexibility to adapt that to a conservation subdivision.
And I agree with both of you. And it was my expression to think outside the box. And I think that's what we're doing with this.
Dan, what do you mean by too much land around it?
Who are you asking, Terry?
Tom,
I think
Oh.
he's asking me. I think, for instance, the 3-acre minimum in the RR3 is excessive, and I think in many of our zoning districts to have an acre might be excessive in some situations. Just got a lot of mowed grass.
or left wild.
Well, except it doesn't happen.
You know, the developer is going to try to jam as many houses as possible in any piece of property, so.
I don't know, Morel seems to be successful in selling, these clustered homes. The market seems to accept it.
Well, yeah, the market has accepted it. It's just, I think we just have to be careful, give them something that, some opening for them to take advantage in some respect that we don't anticipate at this point in time. But there is a lot of flexibility for the planning board in this document, so I guess we have to trust the planning board to be the gatekeepers on it and to, make sure that it fits, whatever the word fits means.
Yeah, that's a tough thing, what fits in what neighborhood and so on.
Well,
Well-
but let's just touch on that for a second though, Terry. So the town board, it's obviously you guys can set the policy. I think it becomes very difficult for the planning board to say, no, you can't build townhomes here if the town code allows them to build townhomes. If the town board doesn't want townhomes built, then the town board needs to make that decision.
And you can specify zone by zone too. If there's some where you really want to, maintain a certain character, you can say that, right here and make it different for different zones.
And again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just pointing it out because I know this conversation has come up recently a couple of different times, and now would be a good time to address this if you want to address it.
How would you address it, Doug?
Well, I almost go back to what Barbara was just saying. Maybe there needs to be types per certain zoning. Maybe the SCR1 allows one thing, the RR3 allows something else, the AR1, AR2. I get very concerned about our strategic farmland protection area. You guys have all heard me say that. Maybe there's something specific in those. I don't have a magic answer for you right now. Just trying to get everybody thinking about different things.
Yeah, theoretically, I guess you could take a farm out in the scatters, and if once you take all the constrained lands out, you could wind up with, say, a potential 3-acre single-family lot being reduced to a clustered townhouse development out in the middle of farmland. And I guess that's your concern, right, Doug? And I know some members of the planning board would be very resistant to that type of development. Taking the farmland, far enough away from the more urban area and putting a multifamily dwelling in that area, which potentially, I guess, under these regulations, minus the planning board taking action, just saying, no, we feel that a multifamily or a higher density is not warranted in that area, so you have to stick with single family. But it makes it a little tougher, like Doug said, because it is noted in the standards as a potential, and that's what we ran into with Morel in section 9. And you know, he wanted to come in with the townhomes, and at first there was resistance because townhomes weren't allowed, and then it was shown to us that townhomes were in fact allowed, and off he went. So that's where we are.
I mean, you do have to think in the farmland, if you are allowing 3-acre lots, that eats up farmland a lot quicker than a cluster subdivision would.
Yep, you're right there. 3-acre lots, like Tom said, are just being mowed for grass as part of a lot.
But, the question is the type of home. I mean, I guess it's always challenging when you have a residential development adjoining farmland because they don't always get along perfectly. There's complaints on both sides. So you'd rather have it just a farmland area. But, if it's going to be developed, if you can set aside, 50 acres for farmland and it's buffered, sometimes the site lends itself to that.
Mm-hmm.
If I could, I would like to see it done individually by different zoning areas rather than, if you're going to talk about an apartment building next to farmland, sort of defeats the whole purpose of zoning in some ways. I think the idea is great, but I'm concerned about not just, Tom, I agree, there are certain circumstances where, we just have lawns that are being mowed or whatever, but I also worry about density in these locations. So there are other concerns than the size of the home. So I would like to see it broken down by, an RR3. If you have a conservation subdivision, you could then do X, Y, and Z.
Okay, I'm going to need some guidance on, zone by zone, what's appropriate then.
That's just my 2 cents. So
I was just thinking we can look to some of our existing plans. Actually, Barbara, the ones you guys prepared, open space and farmland protection for the areas where we're seeking protection of open spaces to help us. I don't know if that helps with the housing type as much, although if it's multifamily, then it's going to be more people with, greater requirements of the land, I guess. I'm not sure. I mean, that just might be a starting point or one tool.
Yeah, how about any zones that are within the farmland protection areas that they be excluded possibly?
There's lots of zoning districts that I think that one covers.
Oh,
That
yeah.
makes it tougher.
So
I mean, to
yeah.
me, you wouldn't want to avoid conservation subdivisions, and if you don't allow conservation subdivision, you'll get a traditional subdivision, which would be worse.
Right, you'll chew up more farmland that way. But I guess my question, and along the lines of what Kathy was saying, like for instance, the RR3, the town code says the RR3, I just pulled it up here. It's promoting residential development of rural areas comprised primarily of abandoned farmlands, brush, open lands, woodlands, ravines, hills, where public and sewer water service either does not exist or is not envisioned. So do we really want to allow, and I'm just going to pick on townhomes for a second, do we want to allow townhomes in an area where we're saying public sewer is not envisioned and it doesn't exist? You know what I mean? So I think we need to dig into this a little bit.
Yeah, the lack of sewers is certainly self-limiting there.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Use our master plans to help it. Because it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, the
There's no sewer.
likelihood of some high density townhomes in RR3 is pretty remote.
Yeah, I mean, it probably wouldn't be proposed, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be clear in your zoning going forward.
True.
It's true.
Well, and especially you never know what's going to happen. Let's say that, sewer gets run down Westlake Road. I have no idea if it will or not, but hypothetically, let's say it does. Then all of a sudden you're into the RR3. Do you want to allow it on there at that point? You could always go back and revisit it. But again, it's much more clear for the developers, the applicants, and I think even the planning board, if there's specific direction that's been given on what you're envisioning.
Yeah. Okay, well, we can, come up with something and maybe work with the staff to, develop a list and of what might be appropriate in each type based on the plan, the comprehensive plan, the current zoning philosophy for each district. So that it's not too jarring for the residents and, down the road for future neighbors of these developments. Yeah, so in a farming area, I mean, you hate to see farmland be developed if you want to, farming to continue, but if it was proposed for development, how do you minimize the, impact on farming, which conservation subdivisions can do that if designed appropriately. So small lots on a corner of the lot, maybe across the stream from the farmland. I mean, ideally there'd be a buffer in between. But yeah, an apartment building would look very incongruous, right next to a farm field and for the town's, character. But, small lots, 2 families, even townhomes, next to open areas, if they can meet the sewer water requirements of the site. Attached buildings, I guess I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but
That's what you have with Morel Section 9.
yeah.
The townhomes backing up against Weifels.
Mhm. And that's been problematic or controversial, I should say.
I don't think so. Not in terms of the use. Some people question the ridge line as to why they're sitting so high and that, but nothing as far as the use itself. I think people realize it's fairly compatible.
And the trade-off is you're protecting open land. So, hopefully people can see past the intensity of development on a portion of the site to the overall preservation.
But to your point, I think that if it were multi-family apartment buildings, you might get a much different feeling from people. I think there's a limit what in any particular area. So this is a conservation subdivision. Maybe the code allows a certain level of density and development or design.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I agree with Kathy, an apartment building is not appropriate, but
No.
I certainly don't see any reason to exclude townhomes or smaller lot sizes. There is benefit to being placed, living near farmland. To many people, and honestly, the size of our world is increasing so significantly. We need to pay attention to providing housing space of all kinds in all different areas and defining those areas and protecting those areas. And I think the buffering is really important and should be maybe highlighted. But I see no reason at all to not locate a reasonable conservation subdivision near farmland.
If we take out multifamily dwellings, could it apply to all zoning districts now? I mean, what you're going to be limited by the site. You're going to be limited by whether or not there's sewer water available. And that's something that'll be factored into the design and the review. Or is there a zoning district where a conservation subdivision could include multifamily, which is kind of different? That is really extending the concept of conservation subdivisions quite a bit.
Glad a dead air here.
Yeah.
You're trying to think of a zone where, a conservation subdivision could end up as a multifamily, which is a little bit different, really. It's more like a.
Talk to me about what you consider multifamily. Maybe that's part of the confusion here. Are you talking apartments, multi-level apartments, or townhomes, or duplexes, or triplexes, or whatever?
I'm gonna look up your current zoning code right now, see if it's defined. Does anybody remember?
No, we need Eric to zoom into those things.
I'll try to pull it up. My understanding was it included what we might call apartment buildings, but I'll look it up.
Okay.
Really slow.
Okay, well, thanks for looking that up.
I'll do that while if you want to.
Okay. Let me go back to where I was, and the other, changes from last meeting were to, on the hierarchy, to remove high priority, to just call it priority. And to make sure that the conservation subdivision parcel is a single parcel. That was obviously a need.
Did we move the slopes over 15% to the class 2 in
Yes.
both the hierarchy and page 3? Because we've got the steep slopes law or regulations.
Yes, everything in the hierarchy
Okay,
will be, I can switch back to the hierarchy. But I think we were clear on the hierarchy.
okay.
There it is. We were clear on the hierarchy, I believe. Just the 40% slopes are unbuildable,
Okay, yeah, that's good.
and then you can build, and those are just conservation assets encouraged to be preserved.
Yeah, that
And,
makes it clear. Yeah,
Right, and any land within Paddlefoot or Brook Greenway not included in other categories is also a class 3. And we made sure it was active agricultural land. So yes, we've made the changes so they're in the law. This table is a quick guide, but they're covered in the law as well.
I hate to bring it up, but Chuck, leave that hierarchy up, please.
Okay, sure.
The ridge lines and hilltops, we've had constant, what's a ridge and a hilltop, and what's just a normal undulation of the land, and what's offensive and not offensive. I don't know. You can't legislate this somehow or define it. And it's always a hot button. Do we leave that in there, or we've got guidelines, but it's always subject to debate?
Well, is it something you're able to determine on a site basis when you look at a site? Is it
No.
something you know it when you see it?
Not always.
Sometimes. Right.
No. Is it a scenic view? Is it a ridge line? Is it a ridge line from the
Is it
lake?
just
Is it a ridge line from the road?
Yeah.
Ridge line from the neighbors? It's tough to define. And in one way, having it in there gives us the
Something to
ability
talk
to
about.
control it, at least bring it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would leave it in there. I think it should be there.
Okay.
I mean, it is very difficult to define, as you guys say. I know it's
You've been there.
yeah, but we do have the guidelines. There has been a proposal sent to the ordinance committee for how to deal with ridgelines, hilltops, whatever you want to call them. It hasn't really been brought forth yet, but it's not saying you can't or you can. It just gives
Okay.
some specifics on what to do with the situation. So
I guess
hopefully that
it's
comes forward soon.
a topic for another day, but good to leave in again.
If I could just pop back in, so I don't think multifamily dwelling is defined. there are a lot of references to it and a lot of, for example, they use overlay and things like that, where it assumes that it seems to assume that it's more than a 2-family. But maybe that's Tom's point, it needs to be defined.
Yeah, I just was looking through town code too, and under dwelling, we define up to, you know,
Two-family
like
dwelling.
2-family. It doesn't
Yep.
define beyond that. And then for searching multifamily, 3 different ways. Yeah,
Yep.
I couldn't find any definition either.
But you see it referenced a lot in a lot of our resolutions and multi-use
Yeah.
overlay. So yeah, I think it needs to be defined.
Oh, we have an example at the villas. Those are 4-family dwellings. So, I mean, it's elusive at this point, I guess.
If you have 3 generations living in one structure, is that a multifamily?
If they're all of one family, Tom, I guess not.
Well, how do you define family?
How about multi-unit? Can't define family.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, could you substitute apartment buildings instead of multifamily? I mean, we don't necessarily have a definition of apartment building, but it probably exists someplace that we could, you know, import or copy or whatever.
Well, I guess going back to, you know, our philosophy on the conservation subdivisions, if we limit it to single family, 2-family and townhomes, I think those are terms that are generally understood.
Yeah.
And we don't have to, you know, anything that doesn't fit into one of those categories isn't allowed as a conservation subdivision. It needs to get some other, you know, way.
I'm just going to be a lawyer here. Townhomes maybe need to be defined as well. We all know what we're talking about, but someone could come in and say this is a townhome. So I think those other things are defined clearly. And that's just me being a lawyer. Sorry.
You're allowed. You know, I guess
I'm generally not allowed, but I can't help it.
Well, half of my family are lawyers, so I can't complain.
I agree with Kathy that you need some definition, and you need it around apartment buildings also, because there are in other parts of our country, there are some very tastefully designed smaller apartment dwellings that abut farmland and are appreciated as part of the community. So yeah, there are different levels of apartment buildings. There's, you know, 12-story apartment buildings. There's 2-story apartment buildings. There's 8-family units in a 2-story apartment building. I think we need to have some definition around it and go from there.
Well, we need a vision to start then. You know, what would be too much? 4 stories? Do we take up to 3 stories? 2 stories? Well, you know, a house can have 3 stories, so why shouldn't an apartment? Or
Well, the hammocks is 5 stories. And we talked them into 5 stories and lost 2 buildings in the process, which was good. Gave more open land.
I think that's the same discussion we were having before, right? So it depends
Yeah.
on where
Yeah.
in the town we're talking, whether or not a 5-story apartment building would be appropriate.
okay,
We
so
have
now,
places where they would fit, and we have places where they probably shouldn't
Okay.
be.
Exactly. I agree.
okay, wow.
Well, generally speaking, as you move further from the idea has always been, at least from my experience, as you move further from the city of Canandaigua, the density becomes less and less. That, you know, that's what you want to see. You want to see the clustering of or the higher density closer to the major urban areas, and as you move out, less. So it would seem to me that, you know, having anything over a 2-story building, you know, 4 miles south of the city of Canandaigua would be something we wouldn't want, at least in my opinion.
Well, a 3-story house is pretty, you'd see that a lot, you know, a 3-story house, but.
Or just use what we have for maximum building height, you know, that's
Yeah.
that would define it, you know.
That's right.
Yeah, that does the job.
Okay. So it seems like we still need to have a little bit of planning and conceptualize what is appropriate in what district. Because you might have multiple units in a small, inconspicuous looking building that could technically meet the definition of a multifamily, but it doesn't have that intensive feel of a apartment building, you know, a classic apartment building that would look incongruous next to farmland.
Couldn't we
Okay.
couldn't we tie it to utilities if there aren't any sewer and water somehow?
I mean, that would be, you know, part of the design review. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't make it work. You know, if you were a developer, you couldn't make it work on a small lot with lots of units, you know, unless you had a way to, you know, handle the sewer and water.
Well, and our current regulations do have area and dimension requirements and minimum lot sizes within specific districts. And then it gets down to within all areas not served by public water and sewer, minimum lot sizes shall be determined by the planning board with regard to specific site characteristics and public health and safety concerns. So maybe
It's in-
that's part of the current regulation we should keep.
The part of the current conservation subdivision regulations.
Yeah, if
Okay.
you look at those, at your convenience.
Okay, well, sure. We can look at them right now. Pull that up.
Tom, while she's pulling that up, aren't there buffer requirements from property lines for conservation? I'm
Sure.
going,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, and when Karen mentioned buffers, that got my juices flowing here in terms of, and I'm trying to find it in the current code. I'm not finding it now, and it's certainly not, I don't think it's in the draft that we have, so maybe it's something, one other item we ought to include. But let's talk about zoning first. There you go. How's that look to everyone?
Well, I think we wanted to get away from some of these large minimums. I mean, that's why we changed it to 10,000 square feet, because, you know, this doesn't really give you enough open space. You know, it doesn't make sense to have 30,000 square foot lots. I mean, you're losing all of the benefits of a,
Yeah, it's all 3/4 of an acre, yeah.
right? So, you know, what we've proposed, you know, 10,000 square feet across the board as a minimum, where you know, we had brought it back to zero, you know, no, you
So
know,
what-
I like this sentence. We could keep this sentence to give you that.
Yeah, that would help protect the rural areas.
Just pull that out and put that. But I think, you know, we talked about, you know, the 10,000 square feet as a minimum. And then you have the room, you know, if you make it 30,000, you're still, those are large, you know, you're not going to be able to save a lot of open space if that's your minimum lot size.
Absolutely.
True.
We can pull this one. Standards. That's in chat. Buffer. Yes, we do have a section on buffers. Share again.
You have the buffers related to the open space.
Right.
So it's on page 3, item 2A3. Just says buffer areas necessary for screening new development from adjoining parcels.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the old regulations that Chuck was referring to.
Oh, page 2.
Page 3,
Mm-hmm.
item 2A3 of 174-16.
So it's there, Tom, and it's also a little bit further down. I just looked it up in the current code 174-16 4B. And it says the buffer shall be at least the same distance as the minimum rear or side yard setback. in the
That's what I was,
in which the
okay.
abutting
Yep.
lane is located.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay,
So it's actually in 2 places in the existing code. So.
yeah. The number 30 feet sticks in my mind. Maybe that's because
Well, I know that out there at Rocco's development at Ashton, I think it was 60 feet was required, and the homeowners were, adamant that that be held, and we were going to hold it. So we just want to make sure we have it.
yeah,
yeah, what we've proposed is, being, not having such a strict, setback or buffer requirement for the buildings to give you, again, more opportunity for open space. So, should there be a minimum or this? So this is the way it reads now, just the dimensional requirements and development standards. This is it right now. Lot sizes and setbacks need to be identified, but they're not proscribed.
Mm-hmm.
how about just have them coincide with the rear setbacks for the zoning district that they're in? The minimum. Is that what we used before, Chuck?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
Doug had quoted.
Yeah, I mean, part of the concept of conservation subdivisions, though, is to be able to relax those setback requirements in order to have more. But you're talking about on the outside of the development, right? Not internal to
Yeah,
the.
Yeah,
development.
yeah.
Oh, I
That's
see. Okay,
the
well, that's
first-
different. Yep.
And more is good, but we also want to make sure there's a minimum that they don't
Right.
get too close, because that is a concern about the adjoining neighbors.
Yeah,
We're
the
seeing it with-
perimeter is important.
We're seeing it with Morel, with the Miller Vulcan,
We see it with DAGR.
definitely there. Yep.
Yeah,
The folks in Ashton. So yeah, there should be a minimum, and I think as long as we say the rear yard setback of the adjoining district, I think we've got it covered.
at least gives us a minimum.
And they can always provide more, and
Yeah.
they do. A lot of times they do, especially in the large contiguous.
Speaking of buffers, is there anything that provides how dense that buffer has to be?
Yeah, buffer is kind of a loose term. It might be I think you're talking about screening, which is something else. So, that would depend on the topography. Sometimes distance helps, sometimes just a tree line helps. But since I think that should be one of the things that should be done site by site, because you can't really tell before you look at the site, how it's going to look from a neighboring site, right? It depends on which one's higher or lower in elevation and what the vegetation is. So, yeah, I think it's difficult to predict that, but I think that's one of those things where the planning board is going to need to take responsibility for what's appropriate screening and buffers. Does that make sense, Chuck and Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in some cases we use berms
Mhm.
to block the visual, and it's worked out well. So yeah, I think to put a requirement of landscaping, that would be tough.
And some kind of monument so that the people don't use that as their extended backyards or front yards or whatever.
Well, that's definitely needed.
Yeah, the delineating the conservation easements.
Yeah,
I was just thinking of screening, an example like the solar project on Monks Road, the screening that's done there with trees, those panels will be long gone before those trees are any significant size.
Yeah, well, hopefully your residential developments aren't something, anybody would consider unsightly. So, screening isn't as as important as for something that, you really don't want to look at.
No, we like nice looking houses, but we should not develop an architectural code, so.
Right. Okay, well, I'd like that setbacks buffers between the houses, and, we'll tweak the wording on that. I guess we still have to go back and work on this, the intensity of residential development and what it looks like by district, maximum height. I mean, if we just put the maximum height, will that settle it? Is multiple family dwelling a bad word?
I'd have it controlled by the zoning district, and then it'd be subject, if somebody wants to go higher than that, they can apply for a zoning variance.
And
That
if we
should
don't,
work.
and if we do not have a definition of multifamily dwelling in our code, we shouldn't have it here even mentioned, right?
That's true.
So that would. Okay, it's already out. Attached dwelling.
What if we make it super simple and just allow whatever the permitted uses are or the types based on the existing zoning? So if SCR1 allows townhomes, allow it. If RR3 doesn't, you don't.
I think
Yeah.
that simplifies it, yeah.
Are townhomes in a rural part of town? I mean, that, when you attach the dwellings, it does, give you more open space.
Definition of rural parts of town changes, doesn't it, Terry?
Yeah.
It keeps creeping out.
But that is kind of self-limiting. If the services aren't there, you're not really going to have any sizable density. So
Speaking,
Right. So,
good, thanks.
I mean, if you do have the services
No, that's
available,
fine.
I mean, and
Middle
some,
of a Zoom,
you
but
might
I
want
can
to,
pull away here.
you might want to, to make the most of it, right? But, how fast do you want to change the character?
Well, Doug brought up a good example earlier when he was talking about the hypothetical extension of the sewer line down Westlake Road, County Road 16. And, that would open up certain areas then that currently don't have that service in our RR3 area. However, there are a lot of people who would love to see that sewer service extended down that area to protect the lake from leaking septic systems and degraded septic systems. So I mean, these things can occur over time, and I mean that's the way it is.
Do you have zoning districts where 2-family dwellings aren't allowed?
Yeah, I don't think the SCR1 allows it. Actually, that was a whole discussion when we updated the SCR1 zoning, and I think that was struck.
So you can't even have an accessory apartment there?
You can have a single family dwelling with an accessory apartment, yes, but you cannot have a 2-family dwelling.
Side by side, or one on top of the other?
Yeah, and actually I was just looking at the code and I don't see, and I'm not meaning to pick on townhomes, it's just keeps coming up here. I don't believe that the existing SCR1 specifically allows townhomes. That's one single family dwelling per lot, one single family dwelling with accessory apartment, and then agriculture uses and agricultural structures.
Mm-hmm. So a townhome, if you had a lot and they were 0 lot lines, they might be attached, but you'd still own this lot underneath.
Correct.
The conservation subdivision, you could call that a single family because you own the lot underneath, and you've waived the setbacks to allow 0 setbacks, and the houses adjoin.
You're absolutely correct, Barbara. And that's the topic that comes up all the time when we're having this conversation about whether or not townhomes should be allowed in the SCR1 or the AR1, AR2. In the MR, it's specifically spelled out townhomes are allowed in the multiple residence district, but that really relates to like, for instance, where it's basically rented.
Mhm.
The lot, there's multiple units on a lot, for instance.
And I go back to Morel, section 9. It came up there, and I think Eric's interpretation was it was a single family dwelling, and therefore it was allowed as part of that when they amended their plan to take out the single family homes or the single family homes and put in the townhomes.
Okay, how can we resolve this policy about, whether they would ever be allowed as in a conservation subdivision in those two zones you specified, AR and SCR1, is it SCR? How can we-
I mean, I know this isn't a town board meeting, but you do have a majority of the town board members here. I mean, how do you guys feel? Are you okay to allowing basically, so the way Barb's got it right now, single family dwellings, two family dwellings, attached dwellings, or townhomes in any of our zoning districts?
I need to think about it a little bit more, but I like the suggestion of whatever is allowed in that, as it is already zoned.
Yeah,
So exclude them from where they're not already allowed, just allow them to be on smaller lots.
I need to think about it a little bit more. I can see where there might be a situation where they're not currently allowed. My first inclination is only in, keeping in with the zoning, but I've only given a little bit of thought in terms of this meeting for today.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, the big question is, are townhomes defined in your law?
That was my question.
I don't think so. It says one family, two family, but I'd have to look at it. Doug did mention that apartment is defined, but that was what I was saying before. I think we need a definition of townhouse. Again, we know what it is, but you can picture it in your head, but I think it needs to be defined.
yeah, definitely. Anything
the
in
type-
here needs definition, so.
Yeah, the types, I'm thinking, attached dwellings or one on top of another are the different types of, housing that you see in modern subdivisions or, residential developments now that aren't single family on single family lots. So those would be the ones you'd consider, either one on top of another. The ownership, I don't want to really regulate that, but more of the look and how it's built. Is it have a common wall or attached?
Right, and how many are attached? I mean, you can have a row of townhomes, around a circle, we have 50 attached. I'm not answering that question. I'm just saying there are a lot of different
Yeah.
permutations of
Yep.
townhomes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's still a question. So how can we resolve that? I mean,
I would look to our experts to advise us. I'm not an expert, so and by that I mean you guys.
yeah,
And you,
it's a policy question. So
I just mean, like Tom and others who deal with this all the time. And I know Tom's been saying, it's self-limiting based upon, where the water is or the sewer is, but things change over time. And I guess,
yeah, I mean, the simple way to resolve it is to limit it to what's in the current zoning. And you can always change the zoning to say, well, if it's a conservation subdivision, you can have this or this.
I guess we do have a definition of townhouse. I didn't
Yes.
see.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. And see anything.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you.
I was actually looking up the pros and cons of purchasing a townhome, and what comes up in quite a few of the statements is the cost, and versus a condo. A townhome is lesser cost than a condo is, but it does state that it has the common wall. Actually, I think they can be quite attractive in a conservation subdivision. But
Well, a townhouse can be a condo. Condo is a legal term for ownership
yeah,
and how it's determined. So maybe you mean like apartment.
right,
A
and
lot condo
it
type
does
stuff.
it does say that in some of the definitions, not all of them. But you know, we need to pick a definition, and I don't think they should be excluded. I think that when it comes to affordable housing, a townhome might be more affordable than a single family home, especially the ones that we allow, the size of them.
So I agree with the
You know.
costs of housing today. You know, single family homes can be, to build new ones would be cost prohibitive for
Mhm.
most people, with just, you know, the cost of one 2x4 tripling over the last year. So
So
How about we just clarify this issue, you know, and present those two options. You know, the one option is just limit it to what's permitted in the current zoning. And we'll go back and clarify, you know, what that means zone by zone, because I don't have that at the top of my head.
Well, the challenge with that though, Barbara, is, you know, and I was just kind of looking at this and looking at the town code. I've got it up on my other screen here. So like, for instance, like the Lakewood Meadows townhomes, either section 9 or even the Miller Wilkin, I don't think that would be permitted to be able to be done. Right. So is that what the board wants? Or I guess, let me ask this a different way. Do you just want to say, you know, do you want to allow things like townhomes or multifamily dwellings in the RLD? Do you want to allow it in the RR3? Maybe that's I don't know. That's maybe the easy way, but I think we need to probably dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Would agree.
I agree. I think that's kind of where we started all this too. I thought, I was hoping it was going to be an easy answer.
It generated more questions than answers.
Yeah. The only other question we had from the last meeting was regarding the bonus density, that we wanted to allow this if areas have sewer and water. And the notes I had was, is this sufficient or do we need more guidance?
We just went through it.
Yeah, how'd it work?
I think it was pretty clear to some people. Other people, it really wasn't the increase of 12 units in this particular case. It was more the discussion as to the open space, as to how it would be maintained and who would maintain it, and that you know, some planning board members felt that should be resolved before we go and grant the density extension. But I guess it worked for the most part.
Okay. So I just
Seemed to.
wanted to see what was on our, you know, the townhomes were an issue from the last time, but I think we've resolved all the other ones. So what's,
I think it's good to have that incentive in there.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So we'll keep this.
Yeah, it's not an automatic.
No,
It says may be increased.
And it's
Yeah.
up to the town board, so you have that authority.
Right.
Case by case. So really, I'm just going to stop sharing now because we have to look at each other and decide how we're going to deal with this townhome and, you know, where it is and isn't allowed. So I'll try to draft some scenarios and maybe we can work together with the staff and get this back out to you in a memo. Does it make sense? Doug, and do you think this should come back to this committee, or, you know, should we just send some scenarios to the next step, the ordinance committee?
I guess I'm gonna kind of, that question to everybody here, are you comfortable, you know, knowing we still have this one issue, but are you comfortable in advancing this at this point? Or do you think we need to come back around again?
I would like to see it resolved before we advance it to
Yep.
the ordinance
agree.
committee.
I
I
agree.
would too.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
too.
I think
All
that's
right.
our job.
So I guess, Barb, we need another meeting. So
That's okay. It's a very fundamental and important issue, so. we all have-
I thought you were going to say it's been very fun.
Um,
Mental.
Maybe between
It's also fun.
Kathy and Chris Nadler get into the issue of what's a single-family dwelling as opposed to a single-family structure, because I think a family dwelling could be made up of multiple single-family dwellings in an apartment-style building. I don't know. There's a difference between use and physical appearance,
Yep.
how they're actually built.
I think our definition of townhouse that Doug shared is a good definition.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you use things like family and multifamily, those are not terms of
Yeah,
art
that
anymore,
doesn't do it.
right? So
Single
I think we're
family,
getting closer.
yeah, a single family is defined in the zoning, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
defined in the general definition section. The zoning section refers you back to the general definitions in the code, which has single family, two family, and Doug found apartment and condominium for us.
okay.
So we know what we're talking about, I hope.
I guess condominium is not from our code maybe, but it's just a general definition. But
Well, it's
No,
a form
it
of
is.
ownership.
That's
oh, it
actually-
is.
it is
Yeah.
from our town
Yeah.
code.
Okay, thanks.
So
And
we were-
Shauna, since you have to live with this thing in the future, maybe you have some knowledge from Yates County or some input as to how you would interpret this at some point.
Hello, everyone. I was here. I just figured out my camera and everything. So, yeah, I would like to work on this. I do have some insight. I don't think I can speak well to it just because I haven't read the whole thing at this point. So I'd like to take some time and then I could, get back to you with some thoughts.
No, it would be great if we could just, take a week, I could work with the staff and come up with, just frame this discussion a little clearer based on, the types of parts of the town that we're talking about, where it might or might not be appropriate to have townhomes or even more intensive residential, maybe exclude some areas as Doug was suggesting, not say whatever's in the zoning, but, be more specific about areas where we don't think, a more intensive style of development would be appropriate. So let's try to do that, say over the next week. When are we looking at for, should it be 2 weeks then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a town board meeting a week from today, so.
Yeah,
24th?
24th, is that what you said? Sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's 2 weeks.
10 a.m. again?
Sounds good.
10 works.
Sure.
Work for you, Doug?
No, actually, now that I see that, I will not be here, but feel free. You're good. I'll be talking to you guys in the meantime. I'll be in Mexico. You guys have fun.
Oh, wow.
Oh, they have internet,
Nice.
don't they?
Well, I think if we frame it, and really give this some thought and, picture the scenarios we're trying to encourage and avoid, we can wrap this issue up, which I believe is the last remaining one. In the meantime, I'll get the revised draft with all of our review from last time and this time together, and Shauna can get caught up. Nice to see you, Shauna.
Yes, you too, Barbara.
And we'll work on that this week and get together on the 10th. I mean, the 24th at 10.
Okay,
Okay.
Sounds good.
Barb, group, one other question I had, and it's been a concern with the planning board, and you'd asked for some of the things that we have to wrestle with in this thing is the, what we used to call the conservation analysis,
Mhm.
which I think we've done away with that term. We're now just calling it the conservation plan.
Mhm.
Making sure that gets done upfront early on as possible. If there's a sketch plan in the works for a project, make sure that's part of the sketch plan, because what we've had to wrestle with is a developer coming in, he really hasn't done a conservation analysis in any detail, and he's providing a sketch plan and asking for comments, and we really don't know what lands are constrained and which lands are not. So that's important that it gets done up front.
Yeah.
Right, which is why we put it early, which is why we put all the development standards later, but now we're thinking of moving them forward just to be clearer, but
And we do have a sketch plan, it's voluntary, which is what we do for the rest of the code, but maybe it's something in this case should be the first step.
yeah, I mean, the reason it's voluntary in the conservation, in the subdivision process is that's how it's laid out in New York
Yep.
State town law, so we can't really diverge too much from that and make it we have to be consistent with subdivision, New York State guidelines for requirements for subdivisions,
Oh,
but
We
we
can
can say it again,
highly recommended,
Yeah.
absolutely.
got early on, amen.
encouraged.
I mean, yeah,
Okay, so you think you'll have another draft out, Barb, before the
Yes,
24th? Okay.
yes, I will, we'll put another draft out. There'll still be a big kind of a question mark about the development standards and what types of residences are allowed. We'll frame the discussion. I think maybe we can have some follow-up, Shauna, once you get caught up, give me any comments you have, and we'll
I will.
add questions that we can bring back to the committee. That'd be helpful. There's just a couple of changes from last time that we resolved this week, so we'll get those in there. Yeah, I can send that out. As soon as I get Shauna's comments, we'll get another draft out with a clear, list of how we're gonna, how we might resolve this issue, with some possible paths forward for you to decide on.
Good.
Anything else that occurred to you that we haven't covered?
Nope.
We got all our,
Yeah, I've sort of broken the whole thing down to why, what, how, and when. The why is, why are we doing this? What is being protected? How we're going to protect it, and then when it occurs in the process. So I think if we look at that, it makes it sort of flow in a simplified way that both staff, planning board, and applicants could understand.
Mhm.
And town board,
Yeah.
don't forget us.
You're all knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Just as coming into this, from just looking at it, and from some of my past experience, that I mean, these kinds of subdivisions are really special, it's kind of communities, and I really agree with Chuck in that the snapshot of what's going to be preserved is really important. I mean, that's the guiding factor, right, around why you're allowing this kind of subdivision, what they're going to conserve. I think it's just really needs to kind of, in my opinion, and that's probably what I'll recommend too, is like, that's like the cornerstone. And it's just really important.
Preaching to the choir.
Right.
yeah, I mean, that's certainly the aim. We're trying to put that front and center and make that analysis come first.
Right.
Hopefully that message gets through, but we will, open to as many suggestions how to bring that even, more forward and more prominent in the process.
And more simple.
We try.
I
Clear,
think
clear anyway. It's not simple. We want it to be clear.
it
Yeah.
certainly defies simplicity.
Okay,
Thanks, Barb.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Barb.
All right, well, if we can get, input by the end of this week, or Thursday, if possible, we can get this out on Friday for you for the next week to, contemplate.
Very good.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right, thanks all. Have a great week.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
you too.
Barb.
See ya.